Everybody, video here for you today. I thought I'd talk about this site because I've been reading about it the last 2 days. I think my next video, I will go down to the Great Pyramid, discuss something from there. But the site I'm going to be talking about today, I can actually talk about two different sites that are right next to each other. And they're separated by about 10,000 years of history. This is Ein Gev, right down here. This is Ein Gev, right down here on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And then the Nahal Ein Gev, which just means the river Ein Gev, runs up through this little canyon right here. There is a Natufian site right down here, over 12,000 years old, located right down in this area. And then right up on the top of this hill here, there is a site here. This is ancient Hippos. This is right next to the 1949 Israeli-Syrian armistice line. I believe there is a facility up here, a border patrol, if you want to call it that. But this is a pretty famous place. People think this is where the miracle of Mark 5 took place in the New Testament. A city up here that's got going about maybe 2,800 years ago. And then around 749 it was abandoned after a terrible earthquake, but that gives you a look at the location of this city here, overlooking the Sea of Galilee. Here's a look at ancient Hippos overlooking the Sea of Galilee. I looked into this place just briefly when I was comparing sites that a certain figure from about 2,000 years ago had been and where the biblical Jesus character had been. This is one place I looked into. The Greeks were here, the Romans were here, the Egyptians were here, the Ptolemies. But the Romans even brought up big pillars, granite pillars, brought all the way up from Egypt. And then they brought them up this large hill here. That is a pretty impressive feat. Large pillars brought up this hill here. But this is one site that I found very fascinating, studying the history of 2,000 years ago. This site has a few different names. Susita is one of them, but there is a look at some of those pillars brought up from Egypt, granite pillars. Here is a look at the site from overhead. You get an idea of the ruins here. But just reading here, it says Hippos is an archaeological site in the Israel-Syria DMZ on a hill in the northern Jordan Valley overlooking the Sea of Galilee. Between the 3rd century BC and the 8th century CE, Hippos was the site of a Greco-Roman city, which declined towards the end of the Byzantine period and the early Muslim period, and was abandoned after an earthquake in 749. So that just gives you a little history of this site. But why the Romans built at this place was probably the same reason they built at Baalbek. A perceived miracle, religious texts were being started in this area of the world. Around this time, the Romans then, the Flavians, changed that story. In later texts, that became the most famous story of all time. Now let's talk about a totally different period of history, one that goes back over 12,000 years. Not long ago, there was a Natufian settlement found right down here. It says 2 kilometers from the sea, so that would put it right in this area, right down here. Here's a story coming from 2019, 12,000-year-old Galilee artifacts reset plaster production clock by 2 millennia. It says scientific study of plaster used in cemetery near Ein Gev indicates community must have worked together to bury their deceased, shedding new light on ritual and mass production. But there are some 12,000-year-old burials at this Natufian site. The Natufians are very fascinating. I believe that they are directly involved with the beginning of Gobekli Tepe, or at least their descendants were. The Natufians lived from about 15,000 years ago till about 11,600 years ago. They seem to disappear right at the Younger Dryas boundary. Just reading a little more, it says Israel was a startup nation even 12,000 years ago, according to a recent published study. Plaster remains discovered in a Galilee burial ground near Ein Gev shows that locals were able to produce high-quality lime plaster some 2,000 years prior to previous estimates. And there you see that white layer found with these burials here. Now, why did the Natufians settle in this area? Well, I think caves were an important part of their culture at one time. I've talked about that in sites that go back 12,000 years. People seem to be riding out the Younger Dryas period in caves, but there is a few different caves, including this one right here, the Manat Cave. Here is a diagram of the cave system where different things were found. Here is a look inside where humans using this cave system all the way through the Ice Age to ride out terrible periods of weather. I think that is entirely possible. Here is another look inside the cave. This is pretty close to the Ein Gev area that I've been showing you. It says, it is notable for the discovery of a skull that belongs to a modern human called Manat, which is estimated to be about 54,700 years old. Its significance was realized after detailed scientific analysis and was first published in an online edition of Nature in January of 2015. This age implies that the specimen is the oldest known human outside of Africa ever found, and is evidence that modern humans lived side by side with Neanderthals. The cave is also noted for its impressive archaeological record of flint and bone artifacts, so that might be a place you have never heard of, the Manat Cave, found near the site here. Now here are a few more looks at the 12,000-year-old Natufian site of Nahal Ein Gev. Here is one area, I think they call this a storage pit. Here is a diagram of a burial with grave goods found with them in the grave. Here are a look at some small artifacts. I believe these are bones up here with the holes drilled in them. Some sort of pottery, if you can call it that, with these designs on it. Smaller artifacts as we go down. I believe these are ornamental objects here. Jewelry, if you want to call it that. But that'll give you a look at some artifacts that are over 12,000 years old. I will leave a few links below. Some of them are very well written and very detailed. Here it says, lime plaster cover of the dead 12,000 years ago. New evidence for the origins of lime plaster technology. It says the production of lime plaster is especially important as a technological development in human prehistory, as it requires advanced knowledge and skills to transform rocks to a plastic yet durable material. The large-scale production of lime plaster is considered a development of farming societies during the Neolithic period around 10,000 years ago. To date, the archaeological evidence from the Middle and Late Epipaleolithic in the southern Levant indicates that only initial production of partially carbonated lime plaster was formed by Paleolithic foragers. Our study analyzed lime plaster covering burials at the Natufian cemetery in Nahal Ein Gev 2, dating to 12,000 years ago. Just skipping a little ahead here, it says, the results of our analysis not only confirm the identification of the white material covering the burials as pyrogenic lime plaster, but also provide new evidence for large-scale production of high-quality lime plaster at the end of the Epipaleolithic, a technology previously associated with the pre-pottery Neolithic B period, 2,000 years later. So this pushes that back quite a bit. It says, framing our study within the existing archaeological evidence of Paleolithic and early Neolithic lime plaster technology, we offer a new model for the technological evolution of lime plaster. Here is a map of where this site is located. Here is a diagram where these plastered burials were found. This is a fascinating article that talks about other Natufian sites where lime plaster may have been used, including a couple that are much older than Nahal Ein Gev. It talks about Yiftahel, a site I covered about a year ago. But it says the Natufian culture is recognized as important during the dynamic turnover in human evolution to food-producing cultures in the southern Levant. It is of special interest not only because cultural changes that emerge as human populations become more permanently settled, but also because it set the stage for the fundamental transition to agriculturally based societies. And that really was spread all over the area 12,000 years ago, the switch to agriculture and raising animals. It says many important trajectories of social change that begin in the Natufian, including permanent settlement infrastructure, heightened symbolic communication, and ritual practice, and the concentration burial of human remains and settlements extend into the Neolithic. But this is a fascinating article, and here it gives a look at these burials where the lime plaster is used. It says the massive white material layer, field photograph showing the volume of white layer with the location of the human burial H4 with the arrow, and then close-up of the human burial H4 embedded in the white material. Why were they doing this over 12,000 years ago? That is pretty fascinating to think about. Skipping further ahead, it talks about the different material found with these burials. And it says the next step would have been to burn the raw material to produce quicklime, Based on the extent of the calcite atomic disorder and the alteration of the clay in the samples from the white layer covering the bodies, we suggest that it was exposed to very high temperature, over 700 degrees Celsius. It says the presence of half-burnt limestone points out that parts of the raw material were not burned thoroughly, eliminating the possibility of prolonged use of kilns as required to achieve complete transformation of all calcium carbonate in the raw material into calcium oxide. So this is a little bit technical, but they were producing high heat. Lime plaster covering the burials here. Here are some close-up photos of what they found here. I just think this is fascinating. People a long time ago knew a lot more than we give them credit for, that is for sure. As far as archaeological sites, this is a fairly new one. The Natufians are a culture we are slowly becoming familiar with. Here is a rock carved in the form of a human face. This is very small. This is only 3 centimeters across, but that obviously had some importance to the person who carved it. Here is one more site I will leave below. It says Nahal Ein Gev is a late Natufian site 12,000 years ago. The site is a large village which is located in the Ein Gev stream approximately 2 kilometers from the Sea of Galilee. The site was discovered in the 1970s and has been excavated since about 2010. It says the uniqueness of the site lies in the material culture, which is characterized by clear Natufian elements, and that's lithic tool sets and technology and other things, alongside finds which evoke the early Neolithic cultures of the southern Levant, thus making the site a unique case study for examining questions regarding the transition from hunter-gatherer subsistence to village life. The importance of the site lies also in the geographic setting, and it shares many affinities with contemporaneous sites in the Jordan Valley, perhaps indicative of a local group in the area towards the end of the Natufian and just before the Neolithic periods. And down here, they show the different lithic material, the artifacts. Here is that small face carved in the rock. And there are the artifacts that I showed a little earlier in the video. Certainly a fascinating site, Nahal Ein Gev, not only because of the date, but because burials were covered in a lime plaster. Please leave your thoughts below on the reasons why they did that. Any site that goes back over 12,000 years ago, we can really learn some new lessons, but there was some stonework found here, individual buildings. The site was pretty large, and also some pretty cool artifacts here. That is my video. It's nice when you can share 2 different historic sites, one on top of the hill coming from about 2,000 years ago, and then down near the stream at the bottom of the canyon there, site that goes back over 12,000 years, the Natufians. I think they are a fascinating culture, one we are learning more about. I think the caves had an important role as far as the Natufians went, but that is a video coming from this area of the world. Hope you thought that was interesting, and you all have a very nice day.